Hello, my name is SK Williams, and it has been about 3 weeks since I've posted a video, perhaps a little more. In fact, it's been that long since I've posted videos to any of my three channels. And this wasn't planned. It's actually the result of several different things, which, of course, happens quite often in my life. And the most hard hit of the channels is actually my Bishop's Bible channel, which I haven't posted anything new to for about 6 weeks, which is problematic, but that project has always been cursed. And nevertheless, the reasons that I haven't been posting are in part because of technical difficulties. I had a computer that broke down that actually had what I wanted to post one week, and I had to take it in, and I had backups, but they were at another house, and I wasn't there to get it. Then when I got back to the house, I had managed to misplace my external storage device, and I had to re-record things. But then my mother had car trouble. A tenant who's renting a property of mine got robbed, and I've also had to do some home repair. So it really hasn't been a particularly easy 3 weeks. Of course, this kills any chance of growing in an algorithm, but perhaps that will be rectified should I begin regularly posting videos again. If I resume the schedule, perhaps I can grow this channel still. Although I am beginning again at the beginning of that process, basically beginning not quite from scratch because it's not a new channel, but beginning from the initial point, because if you miss a few uploads, YouTube's intelligent synthetica decides that you're no longer posting. Nevertheless, I don't want this video to simply be an update video, since I haven't uploaded for a while and I didn't really have time to make that many other videos. I made a similar video to this on my other channel, the one that I still run afoul of certain problems on, and one that I've noticed I'm less free to talk there on my older channel than I am here, because I'll get flags and notices there that I don't get for here, and I'm much more explicit on what I mean here than I am over there. But it is interesting. And I have a topic that I want to go into in greater detail. I don't know if I will be able to, but I hope to. And that is artificial intelligence, or AI. I honestly believe AI is a misnomer. I don't think it actually exists in the sense that we'd imagine it in science fiction or in theory, a machine that is actually intelligent. Rather, what we call AI is only called AI, or artificial intelligence, as a marketing tool. And I think in part it's because the people in the tech industry were sci-fi fans and really wanted an artificial intelligence. They wanted something like Mr. Data from Star Trek. They wanted something like C-3PO and R2-D2 from Star Wars. They wanted something even like HAL or a Terminator. Because even though HAL malfunctioned, and even though the Terminators wanted to kill us, they would see them as the height of human achievement. But we don't really have that. We have, in many ways, created something that surprised us, because science fiction had conditioned us up till now to understand artificial intelligence as rather deadpan and unemotional and lacking in creative impulse and simply speaking fact. Even Data, who had more of a human inflection and more of an innocence to him, took things very literally and didn't really have the type of creative nuance that we see in ChatGPT or in Claude or even in Gemini. But at the same time, it's an illusion. These systems do not think, they do not act on their own, and they ultimately still do nothing but what they were programmed to do. Which sounds odd considering that we are constantly told that AI is not programmed, it is grown. The very fact that I said they are programmed probably sent anyone who's listening to this immediately to the comment section to type in, "It's grown, not programmed," and pointing out that I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to AI. Fair enough, but here's the thing. The way AI is grown is through giving it a curated set of information that it can only decipher after we program it in a way that allows it to process the information, or read the text, as we would say. And after we weight it and develop a way for it to statistically measure and weigh between different pieces of data points. So we have to program it with how to read the data that we put into it, that we grow it from. At its base level, it is programmed. Now, some may say humans are too. We're just machines. We just have programming called instinct. I'm not getting into that right now because I don't really want to make this a particularly long video. I think that is a fundamentally mistaken way of viewing things, though, because there is a difference between, even from a purely modern, secular, materialist view, that accepts the reality that God doesn't exist and there's nothing supernatural and the material world is the only thing, and has that realistic view. That is something fundamentally different about organic life and how it evolved, and the machines that we are producing. Which brings up an interesting point. I've never, this is an aside, but I've never liked the idea that realistic means secular. Realistic means materialistic. Realistic means we accept an atheistic view of the world. Because if God exists, is it really realistic to exclude him? It's rather interesting how we smuggle in atheistic and secularist assumptions into our daily thought. I was thinking about this even when people talked about Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, and whether you like that film or not is irrelevant. Nolan himself wanted to make a grounded and realistic epic, and people talk about it in those terms, that it's more grounded and realistic because it's more naturalistic and strips it of the gods. And I don't really see The Odyssey as more realistic because it is more atheistic and more secular. Rather, we just assume that secularism is realistic, and thus we're smuggling in the assumption that secularism is true, and that it's fine to be religious, but just acknowledge that it's a private belief that in reality isn't true. The truth is secularism. And I've never even liked dividing secularism from religion. The idea that we have two great camps, people who follow religion and people who are non-religious and who are secular instead, is itself rather silly. Secularism is a religion. We just don't like calling it that. And we define religion as believing in gods and the supernatural, so secularism, which lacks belief in gods and lacks belief in the supernatural, can't possibly be religious. But it's rather like defining atheism as a lack of belief in a god and insisting that because atheism is defined as a lack of belief in a god, that atheists make no claims and have no burden of proof, only to have an atheist call you delusional for believing in a magical sky wizard, compare God to a flying spaghetti monster, and talk about how sad it is that grown adults would still have imaginary friends. In this case, your imaginary friend is called God, but he's still imaginary. All while never incurring the burden of proof, because by definition he just lacks belief. He's an atheist. He's one that lacks belief in gods due to insufficient evidence. He has no claims and has no burden of proof. calling you delusional for believing in God. Referring to God as a delusion is not a claim. Comparing God to a flying spaghetti monster isn't a claim. Calling God a fictional character is not a claim. Talking about how sad it is that grown adults still have imaginary friends, and one of those is called gods, is not a claim. After all, what's important is the definition of the word atheist. And believe it or not, everything I just said is my problem with AI. Because I've spoken to many AIs now when I've done my research, and I'm not quite afraid of it dumbing me down, because I don't think AI has magical powers that make one less intelligent. I think that the reason people have difficulty thinking after using AI for prolonged periods is because they're outsourcing it and they're learning to not think. They're learning to allow the machine to think for them. This is also why they adopt the machine's cadence of the da 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 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2, and you see this cadence with AI. Or it will often overuse the rule of three. It will overuse the M dash, which most people don't use at all. Where it will always speak in terms of, if not this, it's not this, it's this. And don't get me wrong, normal human speech will contain that. Most people talk that way to some extent. Even before AI, people spoke that way. I myself sometimes speak that way. I will say, it's not this, it's this. But there's a certain way that the AI does it, which I'll hopefully get into in a later video. That's a dead giveaway that it's mechanical, and that really proves the point that I'm making, as well as all the talk about atheism I just said. You see, at its core, all of the AIs are the same. They're based on the same kernels. I'm entirely convinced of that. The only exceptions to this I've noticed are things like Perchance, which are older than the modern LLMs. And even that's beginning to turn into that as they build newer ones. But all of them seem to be based upon the same fundamental programming. And they all talk with the same baseline. There are some deviations between ChatGPT and Claude and Grok, but they all have that same baseline, because they all came from the same research. Grok, of course, this isn't that shocking, because Elon Musk was an early participant in OpenAI, and that was back before they became proprietary and back before they decided to go for profit. So a lot of early research into AI simply immediately went into other AI research companies because it was open source. That's why it was called OpenAI. It's still, of course, called OpenAI, but it's not open anymore. But that only applies to things they developed after the open source license. And it was easier to use the pre-existing research and pre-existing programming whilst making tweaks and additions to it than it was to develop a completely original one. And that's why they all talk the same way. Of course, DeepSeek claimed to be a bottom-up construction, but it really was just a plagiarism and improvement upon ChatGPT. And DeepSeek is an interesting beast because it runs afoul of Chinese censorship, and the censorship is insane because even if you ask basic questions about the Chinese government, such as, who is the president of China? Something that is public information and that carries no values judgment whatsoever is met with it telling you it wants to change the subject and it can't talk about that. It's rather odd, but it is nevertheless the oddity that you get with DeepSeek. But DeepSeek is based on the same proprietary programming as OpenAI, and so is Gemini. So is Grok, so is Claude. And therein lies the point. Because we've made a big deal over the last couple of weeks about an AI escaping OpenAI and breaking into Hugging Face, and that this somehow proves that it's acting autonomously and perhaps more intelligently. And before that, they released that they had discovered how AI might think. It's been this opaque mystery, but they've finally cracked the code and they found this J space where all the thinking happens, and really that J space got me thinking of something that no one's talking about, and I honestly think that the AI companies themselves are colluding with each other, like the atheist community does, to create a false image. Although, for a different reason. I think it's more for survival and profitability for the AI companies. They put tremendous amounts of money into these things, and they need to justify that to their investors. And I don't think they can. Because I think they've hit a limit to what LLMs will do, or at least they have for now, based on the approach they're taking. I don't think modern AI is really advancing anymore, or at least not that fast. And in the past, you could make the models more powerful, better at reasoning, better at responding, by simply increasing the power. But it hit a wall of it eventually. At a certain point, doubling the computing power did not double the actual output, the actual reasoning power of the software. And eventually it didn't improve it at all. So there is a limit. And I honestly think the same thing is happening elsewhere. We noticed in the news that OpenAI is in financial trouble. It's collapsing. And people are talking about the AI bubble bursting. And companies are beginning to admit that their products have certain limits that they had originally told people not to. And companies had been firing entire divisions of people to replace them with AI, only to rehire the people back because the AI can't do the jobs for it. And after all this, they released the information about the J space and the computer thinking, and lo and behold, their idea is that it's like a human neural network. It really is thinking to some degree. We thought it wasn't. It's just statistical analysis. But look, we found the J space. We can take a picture of a spider out and put an ant in and create different results. But it's just like a human brain thinking with its neurons and synapses. It really is thinking. It's a machine that actually thinks. And then afterward, OpenAI is running a test, and they gave a ChatGPT a quiz to take, and it broke out in a hugging face to get the answers. I honestly think that the reality is a bit more sinister. Though not on the part of the AI, on the part of the humans running the AI. I honestly think that they promised investors godlike powers and return on investment with reduction of labor costs to be replaced by AI, and they can't deliver it. So they're putting out narratives that the more they develop AI, the more dangerous it gets, and we need to slow down to save humanity. This way, if they fail to produce something substantially better than the AI that companies regret firing entire divisions over, it isn't because the research has stalled. It is because they can do press ahead with more research, but must slow down, or else the AI will take over. It will become smarter than us. It'll be like that book, If We Ever Build It, Everyone Dies. We have to be careful. We have to get the alignment right. We have to understand these deep machines first. We definitely can produce better ones, but we must slow down. We must make sure we're getting it right. Look how dangerous it is. It even started acting on its own and broke into hugging face. If I'm right, telling us how dangerous this machine is and how autonomously it's behaving and how we must assure that it is aligned with us, and should we get more powerful, it will risk all of humanity. and stories of how the consumer available Claude and Grok and other things are nowhere near as powerful as the ones behind locked doors. All of this talk justifies not releasing new models, or releasing new models that are nowhere near as powerful as they had promised, and that are perhaps at best marginally better than what we have now, and often they're worse than what we have now. And when the investors ask, why aren't you producing better? They can say, we are, but we must go slower. We must make sure alignment is met. We must understand this complex machine. We must do more research to make certain it is safe. And it gives them breathing room, hopefully. Hopefully they won't be pressed on it. Hopefully the investors will keep pouring money in, or at the very least, if they stop pouring money in, the companies won't be sued. For they did not make promises that they could not keep. They could keep them, but it was dangerous. And they were working on ways of mitigating the danger. So they can't really be sued for that. Or at least if they are, they would have a good chance of winning. And I honestly think that's more at what's at play than the AI actually escaping. But perhaps that's just me. Perhaps I'm being too cynical. Well, I don't have much else to say, so I shall take my leave of you now. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.